regression testing with backstop.js. My name is David Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. What that means is I get to sit between the developers that are out there using Pantheon and the developers that are internally creating Pantheon, developing our tools and our hosting and all of those various things. So I get to go out in the community. I get to spend a lot of time training, creating various workshops and things like that, and lead them online and lead them at camps and all of that fun stuff. I was first introduced to visual regression testing when one of my colleagues actually created a full-day workshop on it, and then I was invited to join him to present it. And I'm going to be perfectly honest with you that I've been presenting this presentation now for at least a year, and I've always presented it sort of as a inspirational talk. I'm going to show you how to use it. I'm actually going to run some commands and kind of get into it, but I don't have a ton of deep experience using backstop.js myself. But what I'm trying to show you, what we're trying to get across, is that you can install it, you can run the commands, you can get these results yourself, and it isn't as hard as it might seem at first. So even as a beginner, as someone getting started, you can also run visual regression tests on your own site. All right, so this is formatted a little bit like a course, partly because this is where it originally came from, and also partly because y'all have access to these slides. I kind of covered it with my mouse there, but it's visual-regression.davidneedham.me. If you go there, you can certainly follow along, but you can also do all of the exercises, all the demos that I'm about to do. They're all step-by-step in the slides, so you can do them on your own sometime later if you would like to kind of actually go through and do it yourself. All right, so here's all the things that I've already set up. I'm skipping over this slide because I already have these set up, and it's not something that I have to worry.
Black. Which one do you want?
This one. It's not something that I have to worry about because I already have it set up, but this is something that you would be able to set up on your own computer. Once you have npm installed and backstop.js installed, you're comfortable on the command line and you can kind of get that running. You also need a live site and a dev site. For me, I have the two right here. I have pantheondemo.com, which is a site that we just use for running various demos at Pantheon. And we also have here a site that I spun up using Lando. This is just running on my local computer right now. So they both look pretty similar, which is, actually, they would be similar if the little slideshow was in sync at the same moment. But they're the same site. Nothing has changed between the two. They're both identical. And that's kind of what we're going for so far. All right, so about visual regression testing, you might be asking yourself, what is visual regression testing? Well, the definition says that a regression is to return to a former or less developed state. So as you're going through and running updates on your site or performing various maintenance tasks or building out new functionality, it could kind of be anything, you're trying to prevent regression. You're trying to prevent recreating that bug you had fixed weeks ago, or trying to prevent going backwards in some way by breaking something unexpectedly. So let me throw it out to the audience here real quick. Who here has an example, a real-world example, of a time that you have been plagued by regression?
So we're building a design system in my company, and yeah, it's pretty much a domino effect. Whenever we edit a card molecule, if you don't regression test it, you could potentially break everything, everything using a card.
Yeah, that's a great example. Anyone else?
Sorry. We recently went from Bootstrap 3 to Bootstrap 4, and in doing so, not a lot changed, but there were these subtle differences that certain people noticed. Unfortunately, the people who are vocal, people noticed.
Yep. That's also a really good use case. You're doing an update. Something like Bootstrap from one version to the other could cause something pretty drastically different that you may not actually notice just by flipping between two versions of the site. So the two that we're really going to be talking about today, the two scenarios that I've got little demos for, have to do with running routine security updates and patches, things like that, and things like theming and site building, so you're adding new functionality. Although, when I was preparing for this presentation, not this time, but the last time I gave it, I was getting up to kind of plug into the projector And I realized as I was kind of looking at the projector screen and what was going on, that we couldn't really read my slides. At the time I had a black background and I was using like our specific color scheme and all that stuff. And for whatever reason, the projector contrast ratio was just really, really poor. So at the last minute, I went in, made a white background, I added black text, I kind of tweaked some things around. But what I wanted to check was, I can't be confident that I got every single place where I changed the color from this tweak, this brighter to something darker with a higher contrast ratio. And I was like, man, if only there was a way to compare like two versions of a site, like my old slides to my new slides. I wonder, wait a minute, I'm presenting on a way to compare two different websites. Okay, so I ran the test, and I really wish that I still had the results of that, because I did find a part of the site that was using the old color that I hadn't gotten to in the code for some reason. And so it actually highlighted, and I was able to scrub it and see and catch it and then fix it so that the presentation went much more smoothly. So if we look at the first example, and I'm using a WordPress site here, but you could literally use any type of website. I mean, it could even be a static HTML site. It doesn't really matter. But in this case, we're doing routine updates, just simple, security updates in your dashboard or whatnot. We take a look at the dev site, or the live site, and we're like, okay, this is what the website looks like right now. Okay, pretty straightforward. We apply the updates, and then we look at the dev version of the site, and we're like, okay, looks pretty straightforward. I don't see anything broken. Did anyone actually notice the difference? Very subtle. Okay, so maybe this will help. Maybe you can put them side by side. We can see what's different between the two.
Search button.
Yeah, the search button. You can also look on mobile. So we're able to catch this, but it takes a little bit. And if you're trying to check not just this page, but multiple pages, and not just multiple pages, but each of those pages on desktop versus versus the small like mobile versus tablet versus whatever other breakpoints, you end up with hundreds or thousands of pages that you have to check every single time you make some mundane change that you. It's funny because like our brain has a funny way of like if we're not expecting to see a change, we don't see a change even if there really is one. So we as humans are not very good at this sort of checking, these very subtle differences between the two. But BackstopJS will actually generate a report for you. It'll take screenshots of dev and live. It will use computer logic here, compare the two to actually show you. It'll highlight with a bright color exactly what has changed between the two. And then you notice you got the little scrubber, so you can actually go back and forth and scrub back and forth and see exactly what's changed from one to the other. It's just much easier to see once that is visualized in this way. So there are lots of benefits to using visual regression testing, of course. You get this sort of comparison versus one to the other, with reference being the production, test being the environment that you're actually going to compare, so your local or dev or staging site, whatever you might call it. You also get multiple viewports. So we didn't really see it in the demo that we just, little screenshot animation thing, but you can test not just big desktop or tablet, or you can test as many different breakpoints as you want. And then you can also scan your entire site. There's actually a plugin for Backstop that will sort of do a spider to crawl every page on your site, amend the configuration file so that you can scan everything to make sure no pages break. Of course, if you have a site with hundreds or thousands of pieces of content, that means every time that you make a change, this report is going to take a really long time to run. So it's probably better to have something like a number of canary pages, where you have like, oh, this is a representation of a basic page. This is a good representation of an article. This is a good representation of our staff bios. And then use those as the tests to see if anything changed between the two. And then error reporting. So it does a pretty good job of telling you when there are errors. And it's not limited to the report that we saw. It can also return errors within the command line. So if you're automating this, if you're including this as a step with like continuous integration or something like that, you can get lots of helpful reporting built in there. And then the tests are extremely easy to write, which we'll see in just a moment. There are some limitations to visual regression. As you might be able to imagine, there's just a lot of noise when the testing process comes in. If you think back to the animation we were seeing, like not only was the button that changed different, but because that moved, everything below it was also highlighted in that color. So if something significant had changed in that section, you wouldn't really be able to tell because there's kind of everything that's been painted. Another thing is that there's a high number of false negatives. Basically, sometimes, for reasons I can't necessarily explain, there will be very minor pixel differences from one version to the next, and it's really difficult to tell why that is. Sometimes one version may not be fully loaded completely, 100% when the screenshot's taken, and we'll see that in just a moment. Also, dynamic content becomes really difficult. When you're working locally or in a dev environment, you may not have the most recent content that's happening on live. So if you're taking a screenshot locally compared to a screenshot on the live site, if somebody adds a new piece of content that gets promoted to the front page, that's flagged as being different and your test fails. That can be tricky. Also, if you're working with a Twitter feed, that's always changing all the time. If you're working with a YouTube video, if the element doesn't load, it kind of loads as static background. And for whatever reason, I'm sure there's a very good reason for it, YouTube's static background is different every time it loads. So that static background will also trigger the test to fail. But in the end, this process still saves you time because it gives you an idea where to look, and you're still able to get around some of these by excluding certain areas, where the dynamic content or the YouTube video might be loaded. You can change the delay time. You can cause certain things to be clicked or unclicked as part of the testing process as well. So if you need to drop down the menu, you can do that. So at the end of the day, backstop.js is still a tool that will be really useful because it saves you a lot of time. All right, so let's actually get into using backstop.js. So some things you should know about backstop.js itself. You can render using a number of different rendering engines. I think we're probably using Cron in this case, but you can pick different ones if you prefer. You are able to simulate user interactions. So I mentioned you're able to click things or hover if you need to do that to simulate interactions. You're also able to script certain things if you need to log in, to test something on the back end. Once someone's actually logged in, you're able to pass cookies that can authenticate and kind of have that session loaded in. You are able to get those reports loaded in the UI, so in your browser you can see exactly what happened, but also command line reports. So if you're running it like we will be in a moment, you'll see all of those. And then it does planize. It doesn't really cause a lot of problems with continuous integration. And then you can either run it, well, there's a few different ways you can run it. I have it installed globally on my computer, so I could run backstop commands anywhere for any project I'm working on. But I could also install backstop on a per project basis so that each team or each project can configure backstop in a slightly different way. Or at the end, we'll actually take a brief look at a prepackaged Node app that includes backstop.js, and it's more of you're still doing it from the command line, but it's more of a GUI for using a tool like this, where you pick from a pre-selected set of variables. And it is extremely easy to use, as you see. So we're going to be editing a little bit our backstop.json file, which includes all of the configuration for setting up a scenario and what the test includes. This is literally the same file. It's exactly what we would see if we were looking at this in our code editor. We have the viewport section. We add a simple label. We add width and height, and that's it. We also have a scenario section where we can define all the things related to a particular scenario. This is where you would list out each page that you're wanting to test. So in this case, we have a very simple example for our home page, and we have defined our reference URL, our reference being the perfect, live version of our website, versus the development URL, just the URL that we're using locally to test against. And then there's all sorts of other stuff here. So ready event, ready selector, how do you know when your page is done loading? You can pass one of those to cause that. You can delay by milliseconds. You can hide or remove certain elements from the page if they're causing problems with testing. You're also able to hover and click, like I mentioned before, and then there's a whole slew of other things you can do in here. But let's actually jump in and take a look. So I'm going to be running through some of these examples here, kind of going step by step. This is one of those things that you could do on your own if you have the slides, if you've installed it all in advance. All you have to do is navigate to a project you have locally. In this case, again, this is going to be the site that I've set up here with Lando. So if I open up my command line using iterm here, And let me go ahead and clear. So all I need to do to start is backstop init. This is going to initialize backstop in this particular directory. It's going to set up the file structure that's needed for all of the screenshots to be placed where they need to go, to generate the HTML for the reports. It's also going to set up a basic sort of demo backstop.json file, which is all the configuration. We're going to start just very simply by modifying that backstop.json, take a look at what it's doing, and actually set it up for our example. So I'm using Atom. Atom's my default code editor, so I'm just using the Atom command to open this up in Atom. Here we go. So these are all the defaults, everything kind of what we got when we first initialized the project. I'm going to go ahead and leave the two viewports that are here, but like I said, you can modify these any way you want. There's some on-ready and on-before scripts that are taking place, and these are things like if you want to script out what happens after it's been loaded and all that stuff. This actually kind of gets in the way. It's part of the demo that we don't really need for the presentation, so I'm just going to remove this here, simplify a little bit. So here we have the label for the first scenario. We're going to set up our Pantheon demo homepage. We also have a place here to define a cookie. Again, this is something you could use to set up a session, so that if you want someone to be logged into the site and take screenshots, you could do that. Again, kind of gets in the way for this case. We don't need it, so I will delete that line. And then we have the place for the URL, and this is going to be our local development site. So if I switch over to here, I'm just going to copy and paste the URL. Put that in right there. And then the reference URL, again, is going to be the launched live website. Okay, and then we have a bunch of other things here, but again, I'm not really too concerned about any of these. I'm going to go ahead and just save this. And then all that I have to do from there is actually just go and run backstop reference, which is going to take screenshots of our reference URL into the live version of the website. And then once you have that reference, it will actually save that reference between each test that you do. So it doesn't have to create new references every single time. Because again, it can be tricky if your live site is changing all the time with new content and whatnot. So we'll do, not here, backstop reference. So just going through for each scenario. In this case, we only have one scenario. And then for each viewport, we only have two selected. Created two new reference files. So then we'll just do backstop test. So now it's going through, it's opening and closing, and then it generated a report. And so you can see here, this is one case where there's a little bit of a false negative. In this case, the difference between our test and our reference, it looks like our test is a little bit fainter. And if I click on this, I can actually see, not that one, I want to see this version. I suspect it just hasn't loaded all the way in one of these two versions. Since it's the test version or the development URL, it could be that one, not a big deal. Either way, I'm just going to go back to my code. For the delay, I'm going to put in, let's say 300 milliseconds. Click Save. I'm going to go back. And in this case, because I changed the variables, what's being tested, I'm changing how long we wait before we take a screenshot. I need to take new reference screenshots because that could have changed on the live site. And then I'll just do backstop test again. So remember, in this case, we're trying to just get a baseline. We expect that our site is the same. I literally just cloned it locally. I downloaded the database, and here we can see 2 passed, 0 failed. Everything is exactly the same. So let's actually jump over and start moving on to the next use case. So with this use case, theming and site building, like how often have you tried to make some little change to CSS and be like, oh yeah, this is a quick thing, I'm just going to make it no big deal, make the change. And then your client or customer or boss or whoever calls you up and says, hey, cool, thanks for fixing that problem, but now this other page is looking really funky. Like, what happened? It can be really easy to miss things like that when you're theming. So let's look at another use case where we try to change some things. So yeah, we can change our viewports and scenarios if we want. let's actually just jump in and start making a couple simple changes to our CSS. So let's going to open Atom right here. And I'm going to go into themes, museum, assets, CSS, museum style CSS from right here. And let's just change, let's say, we want to try making this look a bit nicer. We think purple, well, the purple button color on the front page, like, it looks okay. Maybe, instead of this little purple color, we prefer something that's a bit more on brand for Pantheon. Maybe we want the lightning bolt, that sort of yellow color. I think it would make it pop a little bit more against that dark purple background. So let's make that change. We'll go ahead and save it. We'll jump back to our site, refresh my local environment. And we're like, okay, cool. That actually looks pretty good. I like this. So let's just do a quick visual regression test and verify that it didn't break anything else. Like it's only affecting this particular section right here. So we can go back. We don't have to change anything about the reference. The live test is still pretty much the same. So we'll do backstop test. Oops. So now it's going to regenerate all of the development screenshots and then rerun the report. And now we can see that it failed, and this was expected. Unfortunately, only this particular section is different. But we can see pretty clearly exactly what changed from one to the other. And so we'd want to make sure, to make sure that nothing else has changed on the page, but it should be pretty easy to tell just from looking at the diff. Nothing else is in that bright, sort of Pepto-Bismol pink color. So that's good. Now, if we wanted to change the viewports or the pages that are being tested, that's also really, really easy to do. So let's just go back to our backstop.json. Maybe instead of tablet, we want to create something. I'm just going to make something up. Let's just say desktop. And maybe width, we want to try 1600 by 1078. Just throwing something out there. And then maybe in addition to the front page, maybe we also want to test our login page, just to make sure that nothing broke on our login page. Well, we only really need these first three here. Let's go ahead and add a new scenario. So I'll say /user/login, and I'll do the same for the other one. I'm going to say Pantheon demo login for the label. Okay. Not guaranteed to be error-free, but let's go ahead and give that a try and see what we can do. So I'm going to go back. We changed the definition. We changed the viewports and also the list of URLs that are being tested, so we need to generate new reference images. So we'll do backstop reference. Now it's creating new reference files, one for every viewport times the number of scenarios that we've defined. And now I'll just do backstop test. Okay, so we are seeing, you might have saw as it was scrolling by, there were some errors. That just means it found a problem. It found that there was a regression of some sort, a change between the two. So this is so far exactly like we expected. It's the home page on a phone. Home page on the desktop, a little bit wider this time than it was before. You can see that it is a little bit wider, and it's still just that image. Then if we jump over to our login page, so this actually is looking behind the curtain a little bit on the how poor our demo site actually is, but a lot of the content that we saw on the front page is also on the login page. We can see that it is there on the very, very bottom. And so far, at least, it looks like the only thing that's different is that CTA, that button. And it's also true on desktop. So I think that worked exactly how we expected. So that was changing scenarios, changing viewports. So defining new URLs and new dimensions that we're testing, new breakpoints and things like that. So now, getting a little bit more interesting. So everything we've done so far is just running locally on your computer. And it's cool to be able to do that as you're independently working on new functionality and things like that. It's also cool to note that you could use that for other creative things. Like if you've ever wanted to track if some other page has changed in the past, if you generate a reference, that kind of saves that screenshot reference file. And then if you want to track over time, it's like, hey, did that one website that I like to track that doesn't have notifications set up, did it change at all? And then you can just run a test every so often or set it up to run locally on Cron or something and have it notify you anytime that website you've been wanting to track has changed. Or if you're tracking a competitor's website and you want to see maybe what has changed over time, it's another thing you can do. But in this case, continuous integration is helpful because it can add a layer of certainty, a layer of confidence in the changes that your team might be making. So with continuous integration, you're able to automate the process, like on a build step, where if you're using Composer to build your site, and then kind of send the artifact over to your hosting provider, this continuous integration build step can standardize the process that your team goes through for accepting code changes. One of the many things you could do would be visual regression testing to help your senior developer or whomever is actually making approval of these changes. It's giving them a hint about what's changed between the two versions of the site and giving them confidence again that they can accept the change that you've made and that it didn't actually break anything else. So the question we want to ask is, what parts of your job can robots do better and faster than you? We are pretty bad at tracking very small, subtle details between two screenshots, two images. Robots are much better and faster. And if you can automate not just visual regression testing, but also load testing, and also things like style guides, making sure that your coding standards are the same every single time. Those are things that robots can do very, very quickly and much more consistently than we can. And let's be honest, a lot of times this is the sort of work that we really don't enjoy anyway. There might be some people I know of that really enjoy just manual QA work, of jumping in and making sure everything's working. But I don't know many people that really, really enjoy that. So one example of this with continuous integration is just on Cron. So I have an example, or actually Pantheon has an example on our website, the Pantheon example terminus auto update script. Full disclosure, this is deprecated at the moment. It's no longer officially supported. However, what it does is it actually checks for updates on Cron. So you set this up on Circle CI is the way we had it. On Cron in whatever interval that you want. It'll check for updates on a site. It will generate a new Pantheon multi-dev environment, essentially a Git branch with this dedicated environment. It'll generate that new environment. It'll apply all of the updates that are available. It'll run tests. So it'll do visual regression testing. It'll also do BHAT testing, and I think also a performance test. And if everything passes, if all the tests come back green, then it will make backups on dev, test, and live, the main environments on a Pantheon site. It will then apply the update, so it'll basically merge the branch into master, deploy it to test, deploy it to live, and then let you know on Slack that all of your updates have been applied. Everything was positive. Here's a link to the test results. You're good to go. So fully hands off. You don't have to worry about security updates for your sites ever again. So that's one example, fully automating this process, and adding visual regression into this step is one way of giving you confidence, because again, you don't expect anything visually to change when you do a security update. Another example is on commit, and some of you were in our automated workflows class that we did here yesterday. We're also doing this class again at Minneapolis at DrupalCon. So if you want to learn how to take a process where you're adding a module with Composer and building out your site with Composer, having go through a process with generating a pull request, seeing all the test results show up in the pull request, right, one button next to the other, building out the site, pushing it over there, and then of course notifying you on Slack or whatever your preferred notification system is. This is another example. So every time you make a commit or every time you make a pull request, you can have continuous integration processes build your site, test your site, and then show you that it's good to go. All right, so let's go ahead and jump real quick into this standalone app. So this is another place where we do this as a full day course. We spend a little bit more time looking at the standalone app. I'm just going to touch on a few of the different things that we can do. And again, this is something you can download yourself. There's this example repo. So there's this example repo here. All you have to do is just git clone this on your own computer. It's using Node. You should already have Node installed if you're using backstop.js, so that shouldn't be a problem. You'll go into the directory, you'll create a new branch, just because that's a good practice. You'll do npm install, pull in all the dependencies for this app, and then you'll run npm run start. So I've already done some of that for us to save a little bit of time. But if I go into here and go clear, let me just do an npm run start. So this is the one that I was telling you is sort of not a GUI necessarily, but it's a pre-configured, it's a standalone Node app. You could, in theory, build this out for your team. If you have a team that has maintenance projects or things like that, it's sort of a regular list of people that you want to check websites for. And then all that they have to do is run npm npm run start, and then select the site that they want to test from the list. They go down, they pick the one they want, they hit enter, and it runs the test. All of the various things that need to be done and configured for this scenario, for these viewports, has already been pre-configured. They don't have to know that this is Backstop or know any of the coding or any of those things. If you wanted to, I'm sure you could also create a more pretty sort of visual interface for this, or maybe even set up a website that could set this up for you automatically. You can see it is running, and boom, we have a report. And oh wow, it looks like there's actually something pretty bad with this site right now at the moment. That's interesting. Okay, well, it failed. But a cool thing here is we can actually go in and modify this. If we go in and take a look at the code that's within this app, we can add our own list of sites. So it's actually pretty easy. If we go in, I'm just going to do Atom again and run it in this directory. Atom is my code editor, so it just pops open with code. And then if I go into inc and I go into sites to test.js, these have been pre-configured. So we have the first one here, return to Pantheon test. We have the label. We have the production URL, the non-production URL, and a list of paths. And that's it. So if I wanted to add a new one for our own example that we've been working on here today, I'm just going to go and grab, let's see, from here to here. Let me go ahead and paste this in. And I'm going to call this Pantheon demo. For the label, let's call it Pantheon demo. And then for the production, I'll put in Pantheon demo URL, and for the local environment, the Lando site. Okay, and then for the paths to test, if we want to recreate the scenario that we had before, the first one is just the home page, so it's just slash, and the second one is user/login. All right, so I've saved this. Now if I go back, let me go ahead and run npm run start. So obviously I made a typo somewhere.
I think is it the non-prod site? Should it be LA India?
No. Mm-mm.
The bottom bracket is not in the same place, but that's it. I don't know. Doesn't look like that would do it though.
No, I don't think that's it.
Did it give you a line number?
Good question. You could look at the debug log. Oh, here, it says there's a extra bracket on line 11. Good call. So apparently I don't need...
Here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, maybe it needs to go inside that one.
No, I think that was it. Yep. See, because this one doesn't have... yeah. Okay, that was it, I think. Let's try it again. Yeah, so there we go. So now we have Pantheon demo out of the list. So we choose Pantheon demo, and it should return basically the same report that we saw earlier. This does assume, though, it is going to be taking screenshots of the reference images by default every time. So you don't necessarily benefit from that necessarily, but I mean, it's just a custom Node app. You could jump into the code and customize it any way you want. So if you want to make it easier to be able to test these things, it's something pretty easy to jump in and modify what we already have here or create something your own. All right, very good. So, yep, the button has changed. Button has changed and nothing else, and that's exactly like the report we saw earlier. All right. So all of what we're trying to talk about today, Pantheon has sort of been pushing this idea of web ops, and you've probably seen some of our other presentations that have mentioned it. Basically, we're describing web ops as the set of practices. We believe web ops teams, people like that are touching the website from all these different perspectives, should be able to iterate more quickly. We think a lot of people have problems getting stuck with this sort of like waterfall of like everything has to be done and complete and perfect before we can push it live. And we're trying to do at Pantheon is make it easier. So visual regression testing, continuous integration, all of these various things that we're advocating for are things we feel pretty strongly about will make a better sort of open web by making it possible to iterate quickly, to find those bugs and catch them, and then fix them. And then also facilitate communication between all the different people on your team. Being able to abstract the code away from your project manager reviewing the work that you're doing can actually be really powerful and can involve them in the process, which is always good for increasing communication. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the presentation today. I have a few minutes for questions if anyone has anything. Yeah.
I noticed that you're using Cron to test all this. Is there a way to test in a different browser besides Chrome, like some Firefox stuff?
So it's not actually using Chrome, it's using the Chromie like virtual browser. So it's a headless browser. It's not actually opening the Chrome browser. It's completely from the command line. I don't believe Firefox has something like that at the moment. I could totally be wrong. So my answer is no, I guess. Not at the moment. Yeah, question?
Yeah, so if you're doing CI/CD and say you make that you're using this to test for visual regression, you would probably have to go in and exclude the change that you're testing for, right? Because it'll fail, and you don't want it to fail because then you're. So is there a way you could exclude what you're testing so that it doesn't fail? Because it's going to fail.
Yeah, it's going to fail. That's a question I actually still have myself. In the past, when I've used this on a few projects, it has failed, but it's a failure that we know and expect. This is the area of the site that's changing. We can verify, yes, the test failed, but we can verify like this change actually did happen, and then use that to test, did it break or did it change anywhere that we didn't expect? But I'm not really aware of a good way of making sure that, kind of changing the verbiage, changing it from like, yes, it failed, but this is an expected failure.
Because you could probably export this out to the JUnit XML so that Jenkins could read whether the test passed or failed, right?
Yeah. So when it runs on, we've done it before, is like Circle CI. It can totally just go through and if it fails, report back in GitHub or wherever you're reporting it to. Yeah.
Well, that's like the big catch, because otherwise it's not as useful. It's not really automated. I mean, you could run it, but you still would need a person. It'd be better if it was automated, and you would have a person have to put in, have a little JSON thing where they put in what they're excluding, and then and then every person would just replace it with their own personal stuff, because that would work.
But there was a key in that object called remove selector. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could remove the selector that you're.
And you'd have to pick whether it's a div or an ID.
I think that it may just be like jQuery does it, like hashtag for IDs or dot for.
Or like use regex or something. Because it was.
Well, you wouldn't need to. So since it's CSS, right, you'd be able to just target, like in his example, he had a button class that he changed. You'd be able to target that as a remove selector. Potentially, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So that'd be the big catch. You got to be able to exclude, otherwise it's not automated.
Yeah.
Right. So the fully automated piece that I was talking about was like security updates, where you don't expect any changes.
Yeah.
The part about a senior developer kind of reviewing the work and then accepting, or there's still the person that has to say, yes, this is good, or no, it's not. I would probably feel uncomfortable fully automating feature change. I would probably want someone to review the work and highlight what's changed.
You can use it to exclude areas of your homepage that is you expect to be different. So you could build that into the test. Like, I mean, this block is always going to be different, and we don't want false positives from that. So like, let's exclude this whole little thing here every time anyway. So you could probably do that with what you were doing, but I think to David's point, there's like, if you're making an intentional change, you don't want to automatically exclude that because you would you would want a human to review
You
it.
want to review it?
Yeah, but I mean, you could review that separate, right? You could just automatically check for all other changes.
Sure.
And have someone physically go in and check that.
So I suspect you could, like, using the methodology that I said, that you could script it in some way to find the change that you had made and like kind of automate that into the process of building this.
Cool. Another question? Sure.
Yeah. So if you were going to integrate this in, say with a Drupal file structure, right? Is this something that goes directly in the file structure, like with Composer? Do you just add this with Composer or what?
That's how I've done it for this project. Yeah.
Okay, so it'll be in the vendor bin folder?
Actually, it's just outside of it, so it's right next to the composer.json, and .lock is where I have the composer, or the backstop.json.
Okay. So and there's no credentials or anything inside there. It could go into source code, no problem.
I mean, unless you provided the cookie for the session to like log them in, that would be something you wouldn't want to include. But
Right. Okay.
all right, well, thank you all very much.